So our guest for today's podcast is an extremely well-known person that I personally admire. I look at him as the coolest technologist the Indian startup ecosystem has seen. It is my pleasure and privilege to have a conversation with the man who built the tech infra for Zerodha, which is today the largest, the most profitable startup that we've seen in the Indian ecosystem. And also Nitin Kamath refers to him as a spiritual guru. Welcome, Mr. Kailash. Thank you so much for joining us, visiting T-Hub, and welcome to our facility here.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for very gracious introduction. Excited to see T-Hub and T-Works, and please don't call me Mr. Kailash, you can call me K. That's all right.
Sure. Thanks. We are sitting in 2023, right? And it's 10 years since you built your tech team. I think 2013 was when you laid the foundation of building the tech at Zerodha. So if we rewind 10 years ago, what excited you to join this team when you had no inclination towards stockbroking and engineering was always the kick, right? So what was so exciting about the whole concept or people?
It was serendipity, and 10 years later, I still have no inclination towards finance or capital markets. Really an absurd series of events that led me to stock markets or finance. In 2012, an old school friend of mine had reached out, and he was in finance, and he had this idea to build a retail investing technology, something that would simplify and demystify finance. And I found that interesting as a technologist, not as someone who was into finance. And we started working on it. This was 2012 Bangalore, and that in itself was a coincidence. It was an old friend who reached out. So in the process of trying to build this, we figured that regulatory approvals were a thing, and there was no information available on how to proceed with a financial system. So we figured that we have to partner with a stockbroker to get the necessary approvals. So we started speaking to all the well-known stockbrokers, but it didn't pan out. I think 2012 wasn't really a time when there was any technology or talk of technology happening in finance.
Right.
But e-commerce was exploding in India.
Yes.
For the first time. I was excited to see high quality consumer technology, software. And again, by sheer coincidence, the area where we would hang out in Bangalore, Zerodha's first office happened to be there across the road.
Okay.
And we walked in one day, and that's how we met Nitin. Right?
Yes.
And that was 2012. And we immediately hit it off. I was skeptical because it was an unknown name, and Googled it, couldn't figure out anything, and we wanted to partner with someone big and reputable. But once we met, we immediately hit it off, as our small team and Nitin, and we decided to partner. Spent several months building foundations of the platform and figuring it all out, but in the end it didn't work out. We didn't get regulatory approvals. Okay. It was way ahead of its time, I'd say.
Right.
So we disbanded. It was just the three of us. And Nitin and I kept talking, and I'd spent some 8 or 9 months understanding the financial space, and I'd figured that there was absolutely nothing that was happening. Yeah. Nobody was talking about technology or quality consumer applications. There was nothing happening. And as an engineer, finding a green field like that is extremely exciting. Yes. And that is what really attracted me. Then the other reason was Nitin. We hit it up really well, and we had different worldviews, but we shared very similar philosophies. And I never held a job. I had zero plans of ever holding a job, so I had zero industry experience, but I had software development experience. So I figured with Nitin could build something that would be grounded and not an environment where I'd never like to work or be in. So in 2013, we started Zerodha Tech. I think Zerodha at that point was a tiny organization. It had become profitable already, modest profits. I think there were like 5,000 or 6,000 clients. So that's how it started, and we've been building it ever since.
So you,
Complete happenstance, serendipity.
awesome. So that's where the absurdity also comes in.
Yes, none of this was planned.
Planned, yeah.
I don't like finance.
Absolutely.
But it's all these random turn of events that
Right.
completely change your timelines, right? Literally just serendipity. Yeah.
Wow. So it was one person, right, when you joined? You were the one who initiated the tech component.
Yeah.
And then you went on to build the 30-member team that is always talked about in every podcast, every blog that is written. But you always hire people with a very unconventional approach. In fact, Zerodha is known to do that, right? You'll bring in people not because they have a Ivy background or not because they have tons and tons of experience, right? You bring in people early, especially from a techie side, you hire hobbyists, right? I'm sure it goes back to you also being one since the age of 12, if I'm not mistaken. 13, okay. So what is it that you look at? Because when you're hiring, right, you tend to look at these parameters because when I'm starting up, I don't want to end up having a wrong hire. Okay, because money is short, resources are short, and the intent is there, but the resources are short, right? So what is it when you're talking to the next person who's joining the team? What are the 3 or 4 fundamental things that you look at when you bring them on board?
It's technical skills, obviously. But more than technical skills, really the person's attitude in general towards technology, towards people around you, towards life in general. And if you have the right aptitude, if you have the right knack, you can learn technology very easily. Technologies come and go. So it's really the life philosophy. And why? No, again, this wasn't a strategy. This wasn't planned. As I had said, I had zero intention of ever working. I was happy working on my own projects, being a freelance consultant to make a living. So I wanted to work on what I felt like working on. So that was my mental framework, and that continues to be my mental framework. So I guess it was only natural for me to look for people who fit into this worldview, that you should have fun, you should have meaningful work, you should be able to work well with each other without any qualms, without ego clashes, and people who are grounded. And I guess that's really how it happened. But I'd also like to say maybe this was only possible because of the circumstances where we were in, the philosophies we held outside of this whole construct of hiring. So at Zerodha, we've never really had goals or milestones to get anywhere.
Yes.
So I guess that precedes this, because that is what enables this, the philosophies. So that's how it's been. Nothing's changed, and we got lucky that it worked out for us. In another universe, maybe it wouldn't have. But here we are. We got lucky. So that's how we've slowly grown from 1 person to 30 people today.
Right. So you hit out a very nice point where you said you don't have goals, and where the whole world is talking about KRAs and objectives and we KPIs and stuff, right? And you say that you don't have goals, which is amazing. Okay, but me coming from a background where you hear startups pitch and you have to fund, you always talk about these things, saying that how will you deliver this? How many people do you need? That's what investors always ask startups, right? You're asking me for so much money. What are you going to invest in? If you're hiring a team, how many people do you need to build this tech? Things like that. So how did you arrive at this 30 number? So how did you go about saying that, okay, 30 that's where we stop? Or maybe you don't, but at this point in time, I think it has been 30 for quite some time.
Yeah, so that number 30 is arbitrary. It could have been 20, it could have been 50, could have been whatever. It just happens to have been 30. And the keyword that you used, the keyword is really arrive. We've arrived here very naturally, very organically, and just happens to be. There's no secret behind 30. Could have been 29, could have been anything.
Yes.
It just happened to be. But going back to what you said earlier, investors ask these questions. And when startups go asking for money, so we have, most of us at Zerodha have slightly different views about that. So maybe startups should not be asking for so much money. Maybe the questions that investors ask, how many people do you need to build this piece of technology, is the wrong question. Because I don't think it's possible for complex products, systems, etc. to be deconstructed on day one, where you can look at them as units and figure out other units that have to go in. You can't say that, oh, this project will require 3 people, this project will require 50 people. That's not how it works. And I don't think any sort of software, complex software estimation timeline anywhere in the world has ever panned out. It's always, we underestimate software complexity. So that question itself is completely flawed. Maybe for trivial things, you can ask that question. How many people and how many days will it take to build that website? Maybe that you can answer. But you can't ask how many people will you need to build a full-fledged stockbroking platform. Because such a platform is never built on day one. It evolves over many, many years in extremely unpredictable ways. So the right way to look at this is from first principles. I said that we didn't have goals, but those are material goals. We never had goals of reaching X revenue or X users within X period of time. But we've had very clear goals on what we want to do, how we want to do it, and the quality that we were trying to deliver. So we only ever focused on those philosophical goals. And these are things that are in our control. We can put in time and effort to make something that is nicer. And you can figure out pathways to make a piece of technology better or rewrite it or fix it. But you can't have a pathway to get to 10 million users in 2 years. That's an infinite number of external factors. So we don't look at it in that way at all. We only look at things from a first principles point of view. And everything evolves.
So how does a typical day for a tech team at Zerodha look like?
Post-COVID, it's a little boring because we've become a remote team and most of us are just online. But pre-COVID, it was fun hanging out with each other. But the work was, of course, in its finance, it's critical stuff. It was stressful and chaotic. But over the last couple of years, barring the remote work stuff, most of the things that we've built over the last decade, they've become stable, mature. We've learned how to tame the beast, how to scale, how to downscale, upscale, whatever, add new features slowly, remove features. So we've kind of learned it well. So on an average day, unfortunately, because of this remote work stuff, there's a lot of time that is spent on communication, unnatural online communication, which none of us really like. But, we are writing software, we are writing code, we are building new things, we are changing old things, we are scrapping old systems. We are pausing new features to make way, to clean up older systems. And a lot of time today is also spent on dealing with regulations. So that is something that has drastically changed over the last 3-4 years. We are in a whole different era of regulations. They're extremely proactive, extremely technological, really tight deadlines. And we spend a lot of time discussing and debating with regulators, technology regulations. So it's a mix of all of these things.
Right. So I was coming to the regulation questions. Thank you for bringing that up. Personally, as a person, right, as a techie, isn't it difficult to work in this such a heavily regulated space when you always have this innate nature of tinkering and experimenting with things, and it's so strongly boundaries are set, right? And for you, maybe as a tech lead and obviously keeping Zerodha's vision and making sure the business is the way it is, you might be able to formulate in your head that, okay, this is how it is. But how do you translate that and make sure that the entire team is in alignment? How do you put your vision or simplify it to your team so that, as you said, everybody has to gel and everybody has to work together? So how does it happen? And are there times where you feel, why this regulation, does it happen?
It's extremely difficult dealing with regulations, and they're there for the right reasons.
Right.
But as a technologist, like you said, if you're a technologist who wants to be involved in creative stuff all the time, it's an extremely difficult, really absurd space. And regulations, technology supersedes regulations very rapidly. So a lot of regulations, technology regulations are archaic. So it's hard to even make sense. I mean, why is it this way at all?
Yep.
But I guess we got lucky, because if I were to be parachuted into a heavily regulated space, I wouldn't survive it. It's just not. But Zerodha is something that we happen to have really built from scratch over a long period of time, right? We got lucky the time. We were able to slowly absorb all the nuances as we scaled slowly. If we went from 0 to 100 in a short span of time, maybe we would have all burnt out.
Right.
But we got really lucky that we were able to build slowly, experiment slowly, learn from regulations slowly. And the regulatory space has exploded in the last 3-4 years. So the 6 years preceding that, we had this luxury of time, and we didn't foresee any of this. So we got really lucky. So now we've kind of understood it. It's very hard to accept, but we've learned to live with it.
Yeah.
And we've ended up building all of this. So it's now our responsibility to keep furthering it.
Yeah.
So it's been an evolution.
Yeah.
And no formula there for dealing with all of this. We just happen to have been able to absorb it over a long period.
So, that's same with your team as well.
Yes.
Move the bar a little towards your tech stack, right? So we have tech co-founders. We have founders here who are hardcore techies and want to build startups, right? And they come here with a product first. And they have these huge dreams of, I'm going to build this, the very big picture, right? Which is not, obviously it's amazing because that's what drives you to do that, right? But based on your experience at Zerodha, right? You are known to evolve, as you rightly said, right? And I'm a huge admirer of how do you break down complex things into simple stuff, right? You have been doing this for quite a long time, where you complex stack and you put them down in the simplest way possible, use open source wherever possible, right? So how did you go about deciding what stack to use for what? How do you break this down from a founder's perspective and say that yes, you will reach there, but what is the process?
It's a mental framework more than technology.
Right.
And it's about deconstructing the broad ideas before you start looking for technology. And typically young technologists who are very excited to build something, they start out by picking technologies. I'll use this, then I'll build this. But ABC can be replaced in 1-2 years. Technologies become obsolete all the time. So that's why first principles is really important, and you have to deconstruct everything. And it's not bad to have grand visions and grand dreams. That is what keeps humans going. But if you're trying to build something and you've turned your grand vision into a milestone in front of you, that will most likely result in disappointment. So we have to have that dream, but we also have to accept that that dream is the eventuality. We are not trying to get there on day one. So if everything works out, we'll get there. So you start deconstructing the idea. So in capital markets has systems and technologies and products, and capital markets have become extremely sophisticated. But at the end of the day, it's really simple what people are looking for. People come to a system or a platform. They want to buy, they want to sell, they want to make money. It is that if you deconstruct and peel away all the layers, that's where you end up. So that is the ultimate goal, and all the bells and whistles that you add, nothing matters if you veer away from this first principle idea. So any product, any business idea, any vision, you can deconstruct into absolute first principles. And your focus should be on enabling and improving that. Then everything else slowly, comes in layer by layer. You cannot predict where it'll go, but this likely will not change. And yeah, you may pivot, but that first principle, if you nail it, when you nail it, that'll never change. We can go 50 years into the future, and if stock markets exist, we'll be buying, selling, making profits. If somebody released a product where there's one button and nothing else, and you press that button and you win money, everyone would switch there. All the millions of features that the entire ecosystem has built would be rendered useless. But ultimately, that's all that matters, right?
Yes.
So this way of deconstructing, you arrive at the most absolute essence of an idea. Then you start picking technology. I want to enable buying and selling. So what are the best tools, right tools for the right job? You add those. Then buying and selling is in place. Tomorrow you come up with another thing that enables buying and selling in a slightly easier way. Then you add that. Then you add another layer. So it has to evolve. But on day one, it's impossible. I mean, so if on day one, if you plan out the entire thing and that is your tangible goal, highly unlikely that you'll be able to attain that.
I read that you scrapped out the entire React Native mobile app, and is there still one component of React?
Not in our trading platforms.
No. Oh. And you switched to Flutter, right? After doing all the putting out the layers, and then you came to a decision where you have to switch. What made you take that decision, and at what peak did you decide to do that? What actually triggered it?
It was a very risky decision. Maybe not a difficult one, but difficult in terms of risk.
Correct.
Ajin from our tech team has written a detailed, beautiful blog post highlighting everything that went into this particular decision, adoption of Flutter. So we started out with React Native. This was probably 2016 or 17, and we started out with the basic functions, buying, selling, live ticks, etc., and it worked out fine. And that was the most appropriate choice for us to get to market fast at that point, after evaluating a bunch of frameworks. But as a system grows, increase in complexity, you start hitting building blocks. And React Native at that point was not a mature technology. There were breaking versions. It was difficult. There were lots of technical problems. And we could have patched and pushed it forever and ever, serviced it forever. But you can only let technical debt grow to a certain manageable extent. Right. Beyond that, the returns are going to be exponentially negative. So we reached that point when all these technical difficulties accumulated. We were unable to roll out features fast. There were technical bugs in the framework itself. Versions broke, the new features started lagging. We're like, this is not sustainable. So that's when we stumbled upon Flutter. And Flutter was a pre-alpha technology. Yes. I don't think there was a single app in the world, a serious app in the world that was using Flutter. So it was a risky decision to base a future on it. So you have to evaluate all risky decisions objectively. We picked up Flutter, we built certain things in it, we tried it out, we understood it over a period of time, a few weeks prototyping, and we figured that even if it's alpha, with all issues it has, we can still manage for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. Maybe not 4, but 2-3 years. And that is worth switching. So that trade-off was objectively arrived at. So it made sense to take that risk. So we figured that worst case scenario, Google would shut down Flutter, but we'd still be able to keep going for a few years. So every technical decision has to be evaluated objectively. Everything is a trade-off.
Correct.
So you literally have to balance risk and reward and take the plunge. So we did. And I think Kite, our trading platform, was the first ever serious app written in Flutter in the world, and turned out to be a great decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned this that it takes time, right? You have to have a larger vision, but you build one day at a time, right? That's what your, I guess, motto has been so far. But with so many things happening around, right? This tech space, so every startup calls themselves tech, right? So there's food tech, there is consumer tech, there is, even if it is technology enabled, or maybe tech is not the core, right? A lot of startups have come up with these jargons, and so many new features coming in, people building things fast, releasing things very fast. So there is news around, right? But still you have managed to, you and your team have managed to stay away and, be focused. So how do you stay away from this FOMO that we all call? And how do you tell your team that it is YAMO, okay? You're not missing out, right? So how does that happen?
Really, this way of thinking at this point has become culture. So all casual conversation, the way we evaluate products, features, etc., it's imbibed there. And to say that you look at first principles and you build slowly doesn't imply that you're a slow company. On the other hand, ironically, counterintuitively, if you follow this, you may be a little slow in the beginning, but if you build technology the right way, once you get to a certain point, then the returns can be exponential. A well-built system, 2 years down the line, even if you were a little slow maybe in the first few months, will pay off for the next many years.
Right.
And the only way to build such a complex system with a tiny tech team would have been that. So if you rush and build lots of things in the very beginning, you may get to market fast. But the amount of technical debt and complexity that you end up with after that initial spike will bite back. And tech debt is extremely hard to service. You'll probably have to live with it forever. So building slowly things the right way will end up pushing you to ship and release things in a safer, faster way over a period of time. So it's not to say that, taking things slowly slows you down.
Right.
Maybe only a little bit. And resisting FOMO, I think you have to have a certain philosophical wiring. But like I said, no matter what happens for example, in our domain, buying and selling and making profit is the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter how many companies come up, doesn't matter how many new features they add, unless this fundamental thing changes. It's just cyclical, things will come and go, but at the end of the day, this is the only thing that truly matters. So if you have a clear understanding of what you're doing,
Right.
then you can evaluate everything that comes up objectively. You know that all this stuff that comes up is not going to change how you make or lose money in the stock market. So you just have to have conviction in that essence that you've deconstructed. Yeah.
So there's this whole hype about AI, ML, this huge hype and a lot of things coming up. We get startup pitches and say powered by AI, right? And then when you deep dive, you realize that there's no AI in the core, right? So how do you react when somebody comes to you like this, PhD in AI and computational linguistics? How do you react to these things? Does it make you feel frivolous at times, or does it make you feel that no, it's just the beginning and maybe something big will happen?
So the breakthroughs in AI and machine learning over the last 6 months or the last 12 months have been different. So I think we're going to see, for the first time, there's a lot of things that have come out recently that supersede the hype. That said, this whole powered by AI ML thing, I think it doesn't really matter. Soon, AI technologies will be so commoditized. It already is.
Okay.
What's happened over the last several months.
Okay.
You can just integrate whatever HTTP APIs and your system will be AI powered. So when everything is AI powered, it's as good as everything being powered by any arbitrary technology. So the whole label about being powered by AI is not going to be a moat, because it's already being super commoditized.
Right.
So it doesn't matter from that perspective. Everyone will be powered by AI, and very trivially.
Okay. So extending that question, right? These large language models and ChatGPT doing the rounds. What do you think as a, I would say, nation, right, or as a startup ecosystem, we should be focusing on? Because there is a chance where it might be used unethically, and I guess so is the case with open software, right, where you are a very active contributor, right? So how do you make sure that these things are still, focused and ethically used and grows the ecosystem?
I don't have an answer. These are thoughts that I grapple with very regularly. It's software. It can proliferate instantly throughout the world, and everything gets used unethically. So I honestly don't know how it's possible to prevent. We need proper frameworks and regulations on what kind of technologies can be used. So I guess it's important to have serious discussions from an academic and regulatory and a societal, from citizens' perspective on how we can handle this, because nobody knows. These are uncharted waters.
Right.
And all this stuff will be used unethically by a large number of actors. So I don't have a clear view, and I look forward to being part of serious conversations that I'm hoping will start very soon, before it's too late.
So coming to open software, right?
Open source.
Open source software. Seen you, I think, regularly come up with tools and you post them there. But in Indian ecosystem, you don't see so many people doing that, right? Do you think there's an underlying reason why?
Usage-wise, India would be one of the biggest consumers of open source software. All the startups that we know, large government departments, public corporations, private corporations, today pretty much everyone uses open source heavily.
Okay.
The problem in the Indian ecosystem is that there aren't contributions. We consume so much technology, high quality, free and open source technology, but we produce very little. I don't really have a clear answer, maybe because it's cultural. Maybe we've leapfrogged technologically in the last 10 years, right? We didn't have a slow evolution. We came out of nowhere and India just leapfrogged with technology, which is amazing. But maybe that is why we haven't really built that cultural framework of contributing back. And I'm hopeful that over a period of time, we will evolve, mature enough to start producing high quality, free and open source software and giving it out just as we consume.
So on a personal note, is there a time where you feel overwhelmed, right? So many things happening around and a lot of things you have to firefight every day, right? I'm sure as a founder, everyone has to. So what do you do when you get overwhelmed or things are not going your way, things are going sideways? Do you have a safe space, or do you have a thing that, you just go to this corner, or any activity that...
I have a lot of anxieties. I like to read history, and reading history always helps me ground myself. All the troubles and anxieties that I face have been faced by billions of people over the last 5,000 years or more of recorded history. And you realize that, and you realize that, oh, the problem that you're facing isn't unique, and it's a cycle. But humanity is wired to be anxious about our own personal problems. So reading history really helps ground me. And reading about, when you look at astronomical imagery, when you read about astronomy and you realize how insignificant we are. There's this tiny clip that I must have watched 10,000 times over the last decade from Carl Sagan's documentary, The Pale Blue Dot. It's just 2-3 minutes where, he describes very eloquently the picture of planet Earth, which is just a pixel in a sunbeam. And it's very grounding. So all our, big worries and issues, all of it is immaterial. It has happened and will continue to happen. So these things help me ground myself.
Is there anybody else who inspires you or you go to? What are the kind of books you read? You said historical, but any books that you would recommend the audience?
I like reading biographies and autobiographies, and whenever this question comes up, I always cite this one book, Phantoms in the Brain by V.S. Ramachandran.
Okay.
It's a popular science, neuroscience book, and it's fascinating. It's also very grounding. All our complexities and egos and imagined self-delusion all stems from chemical activity in the brain, right? So he very beautifully deconstructs that. I read that in my early 20s and it was very pivotal, and it completely changed my worldview. That one book I always cite. Yeah.
So, lastly, you have come to this point in your life, right? And you've gone through a beautiful journey, I would say, doing projects as a freelancer, bunking college and working on projects, and then going deeper into things, learning how to deconstruct and things like that. There must be areas where in your life where you said, okay, this is what I'm going to take back with me. Were they It might be people, they might be situations, right? Do you still, something happened 10 years ago and you still implement it? Or are there any situations in your life where they were like turning points, I would say?
Many, like I said, I have a very absurdist worldview. Plans don't tend to work. World is infinitely chaotic, and the biggest changes in my life has been complete coincidences, a series of coincidences, literally butterfly effect. So there are countless tiny random events. It could be just that one word that you overhear that really shape your life. So constantly, infinite number of events that I probably can't even trace back. So there are events that I recollect, then I forget. So it's just that chaotic number of events. So I can't pick and choose, because in my view, all this chaos is what has led me to where I am, and each of us. So that's how I look at it.
Anybody who inspires you or a mentor who you go to?
I don't want to pick names, but I really like spending time with the people around us at, let's say, Zerodha, or all the projects that we work with, culturally inclined people. So I have a blast socially and professionally working with them. And there are lots of people who do inspirational things, but I tend not to have any role models in my mind, because nobody is perfect, and you don't want some flaw in a person completely destroying your imagery of a role model. But I look up to a lot of people and very specific traits or things they do. So I don't want to name anyone. I can't name anyone.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much. It was amazing. If you want to leave an advice to the new founders in terms of how should they go about building their tech, one word that you would...
First principles.
Perfect. Thank you. On this note, thank you so much.
Thank you.